Good evening there, everybody. What is happening? Hopefully, y'all are having a wonderful day today. So, when it comes down to it, I thought, of course, that I'd review this little video and talk about this subject that I found to be very particularly interesting. And this, of course, is going to be over the Gervonta Tank Davis versus Frank Martin fight that ended up happening yesterday. And, of course, for those of you that did not end up seeing the fight, Gervonta Tank Davis put on a statement yesterday, or put out a statement. Now, of course, was it the most dominating performance that I've ever seen a fighter have? No, not necessarily. And if you're going to ask me, do I believe that Gervonta Tank Davis was more than likely winning the fight before the knockout? No, probably not. I thought that Frank Martin took 4 or 5 rounds within the first 6 rounds, but of course it doesn't really matter because at the end of the day, within the 8th round, once Gervonta Tank Davis really started putting on the pressure, Frank Martin had no answers whatsoever. And pretty much like I predicted, as soon as the pressure and as soon as the power was going to be put on, Frank Martin really was not going to have a whole lot of answers, at least in my personal view. So great on Gervonta Tank Davis. But the question is, once again, is where does he really rank right now? And the better question is, where can he really go from here? Apparently, Gervonta Tank Davis states that his next fight very well may be against that of Vasily High-Tech Lomachenko. Now, the question, of course, also will be is that will the LDBC and new media claim that Lomachenko already has multiple losses on his record and that's he's 36 heading on to 37 years old. I doubt we're going to hear anything like that from the LDBC and new media. But talking from a more objective note, Vasily Lomachenko is coming off of a knockout victory over George Kambosos, and Vasily Lomachenko also, still in my view, is about an A-grade level fighter in his career. I'm not quite sure if he's quite the same level of fighter as what he once was. I think that he definitely has slowed down a little bit. But this is why I also like to comment about certain things. Like when you take a look at Boxing Ego, he loves to talk about all this stuff about how Canelo Alvarez, he was fighting guys off of their worst performances, and he was fighting guys that had already had multiple losses, like Sergey Kovalev, right? But when Canelo Alvarez still fought those guys, a lot of those guys were either A-grade level champions coming off of decent wins, like what Sergey Kovalev was, or what Miguel Cotto was, or some of them were undefeated, like Billy Joe Saunders and Caleb Plant and some of the other guys. What you notice is that there's no narratives for Gervonta Tank Davis of fighting Frank Martin apparently off of his worst performance last time against some Armenian fighter or whatever the hell that fighter's name was. There was no narrative whatsoever from Boxing Ego cementing that whatsoever that Gervonta Tank Davis was fighting Frank Martin off of his worst performance. But once again, just talking about from an objective and logical point, because of course I also like to point out the double standards that a lot of the LDBC and new media put out there as well. But coming from a more objective place, Gervonta Tank Davis is a tremendous fighter. He is a tremendous talent. And when you talk about, anyone being a major threat to him throughout the 135 to 140 pound weight classes, to be honest with you, I'm not really quite sure who's going to be the biggest threat to him. Of course, I can take a look at Devin Haney, but to be honest with you, I don't think that Devin Haney has the level of power nor the level of boxing ability to truly threaten Gervonta Tank Davis the same way that certain other people say. I think that that was kind of exposed within his last fight, and that's assuming that Devin Haney is even going to be the same fighter as what he once was, or possibly improved. We never know. He may be a lesser version of what he once was. Of course, there's Teofimo Lopez, but he has been majorly exposed in certain areas as well. Especially within his last fight against Jermaine Ortiz, and also in that fight, I believe, against George Kambosos. And there's some other fighters like Liam Paro, who of course ended up winning the belt, and he's a phenomenal fighter. But the question is going to be about Gervonta Tank Davis is that what fighter is really going to threaten him, both in terms of the skill set and also in terms of athleticism. Gervonta Tank Davis is not just one of the best boxers on the planet, he's one of the top athletes. And that's why when Gervonta Tank Davis stated that I'm the Canelo Alvarez of my weight class, he was 100% right. Because when you talk about Canelo Alvarez is so skillfully gifted. And then on top of that, he's so physically gifted in terms of his power, when it comes down to where there's really almost no major threats unless you're going to be decently bigger than that of Canelo Alvarez, almost none whatsoever. He's fought Caleb Plant, he's fought Danny Jacobs, he's fought Gennady Golovkin, he's fought Billy Joe Saunders, all A-grade level fighters, Miguel Cotto, a couple of other guys, and there really hasn't been any major threats towards Canelo Alvarez unless your name is David Benavidez or Dimitri Bivol, someone who really should be at light heavyweight or higher. There really hasn't been any major threats to that of Canelo Alvarez. I think that it's going to be the same thing with Gervonta Tank Davis. I think that Gervonta Tank Davis, in order to face a real threat towards him, at least when you talk about his level of talent, he might even have to fight someone at the welterweight class, because I just don't see any of the fighters at the 140-pound weight class really having the athleticism to truly threaten Gervonta Tank Davis. Some of them may have the boxing ability, like when you take a look at Shakur Stevenson, who's at 135 right now, or when you take a look at Lomachenko or Liam Paro or some of those guys. Yeah, they might have the boxing ability to truly threaten Gervonta Tank Davis. But what Gervonta Tank Davis is going to need is not just someone that's a great boxer. He's going to need someone that's a great puncher, a great boxer puncher. That's what he's really going to need. Kind of like when Canelo Alvarez met in the ring against Dmitry Bivol or against that of Gennady Triple G Golovkin. That's what he's truly going to need. So it's going to be interesting to see where Gervonta Tank Davis goes from here. But anyways, Boxing Ego is going to talk about it. We all know that he's one of Gervonta Tank Davis's biggest fans. Let's get into it.
Oh.
Like I've told people, Gervonta Tank Davis, when you talk about pound for pound, boxing's #1 hardest hitter for a challenger or for a championship caliber fighter, I think that you have about 3, maybe 4 fighters when you have in that conversation. I think you're talking about Artibitabeef, I think you're talking about Naoya Inoue, and I think you're talking about Gervonta Tank Davis, to where they can even be in the ring with championship level caliber fighters, and the right punch could knock them out at any given moment in time. Now, of course, I could say also Canelo Alvarez, but I'm not quite sure if his punching power is quite on the same level as those guys. Terrence Bud Crawford as well, but I'm not quite sure if his punching power is quite on the same level as those guys. I would say that Gervonta Tank Davis and Inoue and Better Beef, that their punching power is just ever so slightly ahead of those guys. And that says a lot, because both Crawford and Canelo, they both have A-grade level power, And of course, I can't count fighters like Deontay Wilder or AJ right now, because neither of them are really champions at the moment. So we'll see what happens with them. But, once again, when you talk about Gervonta Tank Davis, in terms of being, a pound-for-pound puncher, he's up there with anybody.
And we're having another glorious day. We having a celebration. Let it get hot. Tank Davis continues to make some of y'all mad. The haters is out in full force. I put out this tweet. I said, the haters in boxing are sad. I seen people leaving me comments. They were saying stuff like, oh, Tank was getting his beat before the knockout. He got lucky. This is the same.
Well, I'm going to be very curious to see what Dante's Boxing Nation has to say, because isn't the narrative always with Canelo Alvarez that he's always getting outboxed by these guys like Billy Joe Saunders and Caleb Plant before he ends up getting the knockout? Isn't that what we always hear from Dante's Boxing Nation? And also that Canelo only fights guys coming off of their worst performance. So I wonder what he's going to say about Gervonta Tank Davis, because wouldn't that apply, to Gervonta Tank Davis's most recent performances, or at least this most recent one? Wouldn't that apply?
Y'all said about Danny Garcia when he fought Amir Khan. My question to you is, who cares about being outboxed if the person who was, quote unquote, boxing well gets knocked the out? That is pathetic, LOL. And I meant every word. Why are people talking about Frank Martin was boxing so well when you've seen the aftermath? That makes literally no sense to me. People who are...
Well, to me, it'd be a more relevant point if Frank Martin was someone that I would consider a B or C grade level fighter, like how Gary Antoine Russell ended up losing yesterday. Then to me, it would be a little bit more concerning. But the fact that he ended up knocking out an A grade level fighter, someone with great boxing ability and decent athleticism, to me, it doesn't really mean much. We all know that Gervonta Tank Davis likes to take the beginning of fights slow a little bit anyway. I think that he was trying to figure him out and make Frank Martin kind of waste his gas a little bit more. And once again, pretty much what I had predicted, once Gervonta Tank Davis was really going to step it up, I was not convinced that Frank Martin was going to be completely overall, once again, that he was going to be assertive enough in order to win that fight, and I ended up pretty much being correct.
Tank haters, they're scrambling because Gervonta Davis keeps shutting people up. He keeps winning. He's 30-0, mostly all knockouts. Make sure you guys subscribe to my channel. Hit the bell notification icon so you don't miss a thing. And it's funny because he's clearly surpassing all of his contemporaries. There's not anyone in his division who has achieved...
Well, Gervonta Tank Davis is a great fighter, and he deserves a lot of credit. But the thing is that when you talk about clearly surpassing a lot of his contemporaries, I guess it depends overall on what categories that you're talking about. If you're talking about in terms of box office, yeah, he's definitely surpassing them a lot in those categories. If you're talking about in terms of skill set, he's definitely surpassing some of those guys in some of those categories. Of course, Shakur Stevenson, at his best, might have something to say about that. And there might be a couple of other guys that maybe I'm not mentioning. But when you talk about box office and star power, he's definitely surpassing a lot of his contemporaries. But still, the problem remains with Gervonta Tank Davis is that he just doesn't have that deep of a resume. But now he has Ryan Garcia on his record. He has Frank Martin on his record. And of course, if he's able to get Vasily Lomachenko on his record, sure, Vasily Lomachenko, in my view, would not be at his absolute peak, but he still would be an A-grade level fighter coming off of a decent win. So it would probably be just as good as when Canelo Alvarez probably defeated Sergey Kovalev, or at least somewhere around there. Somewhere around there.
More, who's more electrifying. Listen, I told you guys for a long time what it is. Y'all didn't want to believe me. Y'all said, "Oh, Ego, you're paid by PBC and you love Tank and you're a D rider and all that." Tank keeps shut.
And all those are true. All those are true. It is what it is. We all know that you love some Gervonta Tank Davis boxing ego. It is what it is. You love the man religiously. All right. Let's not try to, let's not try to pussyfoot here. You love the man. It is what it is. You're in love with the man. But at the end of the day, Gervonta Tank Davis is a box office star. He's a great fighter.
Y'all up. He's doing the work for me. Congratulations to Tank. I have a lot more content that I'll be dropping about this fight. Frank Martin, valiant effort, attempt, but the end was inevitable. And he got knocked out. I told you that was my prediction. Frank Martin, very good fighter. If he fought anyone not named Tank, my prediction quite possibly would have been different depending on who he was.
That's very possible, because I'm not sure if Frank Martin, at least as good as what he was looking, I'm not sure if he would have lost to a lot of the other 135 pounders in that fight. I think that that's a fair point. I'm not quite sure if I 100% would have favored Vasily Lomachenko the way that I've been seeing him as of recent over this version of Frank Martin or Teofimo Lopez or, Ryan Garcia or some of the other guys. I mean, it's very possible, because I don't really know how good Frank Martin actually is. But, this was a very tough challenge.
Fighting. But I just felt he wasn't going to beat Tank Davis. Experience matters. Tank was involved in the biggest fight. This is not my opinion. This is the facts. See, there's a lot of difference between me and other content creators. A lot of people only speak their opinion. I speak my opinion, but I also speak facts. Last year, 2020.
Well, Mr. Boxing Ego, you do have a certain amount of bias. Because if you were 100% keeping the same standards, you would have also said that Gervonta Tank Davis is fighting Frank Martin off of his worst performance, and that he's fighting a guy that really doesn't have as much power as, to threaten him as possible, blah, blah, blah. You would have said similar things. But, once again, you also have racial motivations. And on top of that, you're a major PBC fan. But it is what it is. Gervonta Tank Davis, once again, I do agree with a lot of what Ego is saying. I do think that Gervonta Tank Davis is the next big star in boxing. And I do think that eventually he will surpass Canelo Alvarez as the face of boxing, if he hasn't already done it already within this fight. Now, within the last fight with Ryan Garcia, I can't really claim that he's surpassed anyone yet in terms of the face of boxing. I think that he's getting closer, but the thing is that he was supposed to do those numbers with Ryan Garcia because that was a fight that everyone was talking about for the past several years.
23, Tank and Ryan Garcia had the highest grossing, biggest fight out of everyone.
On Paramount Mountain, the stakes get higher.
Everyone, including Canelo, who some of y'all are still clinging on for dear life and trying to say he's the face of boxing. But whatever, Tank, Ryan Garcia.
Right, but here's the thing. We can't completely judge Gervonta Tank Davis and Canelo Alvarez just off of one whole entire fight. That's like me, if I were to take a look at Gervonta Tank Davis, that's like me taking a look at Gervonta Tank Davis, and after this fight, let's just say it does 700,000 pay-per-view buys, and me saying, well, you know what, Canelo overall throughout his career has done more 1 million pay-per-view buys, so he's still the face of boxing. That doesn't make any sense. You have to talk about what's recently happened. Now, of course, you have to take over kind of what's happened within the past couple of years. But Canelo Alvarez, within his last fight, I believe, against Jaime Munguia, did about 550,000 pay-per-view buys. and that I don't even believe was with a super memorable fighter for the undercard, or at least definitely not on the same level as David Benavidez. So if Gervonta Tank Davis truly is the main face of boxing over Canelo Alvarez with David Benavidez on the undercard, then this fight should have easily done 700,000 pay-per-view buys at a minimum. So we'll see.
Yeah, it sold very well, did over 1 million. Not many people in this current market are doing over 1 million.
Right, but once again, Mr. Boxing Ego, that fight was supposed to do over 1 million pay-per-view buys. I don't know why these guys keep trying overall to pretend like Ryan Garcia was not a big part of that pay-per-view. Ryan Garcia is one of the top 5 to top 10 most known boxers in all of boxing today, and the man has never even won a belt. So let's not sit here and pretend like Gervonta Tank Davis was just on average doing super duper great numbers and that he was getting close to 500,000 or 700,000 K, or 700,000, for his fights. The man never even did 300,000 pay-per-view buys before Ryan Garcia. Let's keep that in check, okay? Let's keep that in check, all right? So it is what it is, and I like Gervonta Tank Davis. He's a star. Don't get it twisted, all right? But Ryan Garcia was a big part of the reason why that fight sold. Do I believe that he was the bigger star over Gervonta Tank Davis? No, probably not, but that was a fight of two superstars when you talk about star power, all right? So let's not sit here and pretend like Ryan Garcia was not a big part of that package deal. Now, if you want to compare that fight to any fight that ended up happening last year, you compare it to Crawford versus Spence, because that was also another fight that people were talking about for the past several years. Canelo Alvarez, when you talk about fights that have been talked about for the past several years, there's only one fight that Canelo Alvarez can have that's like that at the current moment in time, and that's David Benavidez. There's not going to be any other fight for Canelo Alvarez that's going to be talked about in the same light as Ryan Garcia versus Gervonta Tank Davis. The only couple of fights that Canelo, when you talk about him being in that conversation of 1 million pay-per-view worthy buys, you're talking about Gennady Golovkin, you're talking about Mayweather, and potentially David Benavidez. All right? There's never been any other fights within Canelo's career that have probably been around there because of the level of opponents. No one has really taken a look at those opponents and said, wow, that guy is really going to truly defeat Canelo Alvarez. And the fact that he still does great numbers with those guys, it shows you how much of a star that Canelo Alvarez actually was.
Review buys. And it just keeps going up for Tank. Tank, with performances like he had last night, I don't see this train stopping anytime soon. He looks locked in. He looks disciplined. And he's making it count. When he's in the ring, he's making it count. And I said this for a while. Like, you look at Canelo, who some people are, again, clinging on, trying to say he's the face of boxing. Tank Davis just puts on better shows at this current point. Like, when's the last time?
You have to go by the numbers, Boxing Ego. You don't you don't overall go by who puts on better shows. When you talk about who has the better shows overall, once again, you're talking about the numbers. You always have to pull numbers out of your ass, but then when it comes to Canelo Alvarez and a losing argument, then all of a sudden it's about who's putting on the better show. Canelo Alvarez puts on great shows as well, so let's stop the bullshit.
Canelo knocks somebody out in that fashion, like,
right, but that's not about who's the face of boxing, Mr. Boxing Ego. If that's the case, then Deontay Wilder would have been the face of the heavyweight division over Anthony Joshua. Let's stop fucking around.
Even the Caleb Plant knockout, he wasn't knocked out like Frank Martin, and then you have Gervonta.
Now, if you want to say that Gervonta Tank Davis is the more electrifying knockout artist, even though of course he has nowhere near the resume of a Canelo Alvarez, sure, yeah, we can talk about that. But Boxing Ego bringing up that point, that really means nothing to me. All that's saying is that Boxing Ego, overall, he says all this shit, overall about how Gervonta Tank Davis is the clear face of boxing over Canelo. Right, so that's the best point that you have. That tells me that you don't even believe that yet, at least not a 100% confirmation. But, Gervonta Tank Davis will be proven as the face of boxing, at least the new face of boxing over Canelo Alvarez, if this fight does at a minimum 700,000 pay-per-view buys or up. That's what it will prove.
Hey, David doing...
Because once again, this fight had David Benavidez and a multitude of other good fights on the undercard. It had Carlos Adams, whatever his name is. It had Gary Antoine Russell. Now, to be fair, I don't even remember the fighters that were on Canelo Alvarez's undercard. I'm trying to remember if Isaac Pitbull Cruz was on that undercard. Maybe he was. I can't remember. So maybe, maybe I'm not thinking here. I can't remember. But I thought that he was on another undercard. I can't remember.
Backflips, hitting backflips off the turnbuckle. It's just the most electrifying show. Must-see TV.
Now that I think about it, I'm pretty sure that Isaac Pitbull Cruz versus Rolly Romero was on the undercard, which is which is a pretty big fight as well. I can't remember. I thought it was, but if I'm wrong about that, someone correct me.
Be face of boxing stuff. So congratulations to Tank Davis once again. And it's just sad to see the haters are still like, I see all their moves. Before the fight, they looked at Frank Martin. He's a black fighter, dark skin, in shape, brolic, good fighter, explosive, has power, southpaw. He had literally all the ingredients where on paper it should have been a very good fight. And it was a good fight. But on paper, you know, some people thought it had the makings for Frank Martin to upset the apple cart. And
Right, very similar with Canelo Alvarez throughout a lot of his career as well. Just like a lot of people will state that Canelo Alvarez, that, oh, he's going to avoid Caleb Plant, he's avoiding Billy Joe Saunders, he's avoiding this guy. And then when Canelo Alvarez beats him, then all of a sudden there's always some flaw to where Canelo Alvarez can't get full credit for those fights. I agree with you, sir. But you do the exact same shit with fighters that you need to try to tear down.
this is how old media works. And content creators
Well, this is how you work as well. So don't just be talking about old media. Look in the mirror and talk about yourself.
that are shapeshifters. They'll say all this hoopla before the fight, and then when it does,
Just like how Canelo Alvarez beats guys when they're 36 years old, and Gennady Golovkin and Canelo Alvarez once again, he he beats guys when they're older or when they're not coming off of the best performances. Has Boxing Ego ever mentioned once about how Frank Martin was coming off the worst performance in his career last time against that one Armenian fighter? Has he ever mentioned once about how Frank Martin has never even won a legitimate belt before? Has he talked about that? Has he talked about that? He hasn't said one thing about it. So let's be real here, Mr. Boxing Ego. You do the exact same shit. I'm getting tired of all these LDBC, new media, victimization, pro-blackity black channels, always bitching, moaning, and complaining about old media, and they do the literally exactly the same exact shit, just with different demographics of fighters. This is why no one respects their channels.
doesn't come true, then they'll back off the block and start saying a bunch of other gibberish and making other excuses for why Gervonta still isn't that dude. But you just said this guy was capable of beating Gervonta. You said
Agreed 100%. You should keep that same energy everywhere else.
Frank Martin. There were so many people leaving me comments, and they were like, "I don't know, Ego. I have a funny feeling about this. I'm smelling the upset." And then now when it doesn't happen, they say, "Oh, he needs to fight Shakur." Shakur or some other excuse to keep hating on him. Just give it up. The kid is special. He's talented. I've been telling you that.
Agreed, you should have kept that same energy with Canelo Alvarez, sir. But I agree with you, he is special. And when we talk about Gervonta Tank Davis, when I just take a look at all his contemporaries, I mean, who really is going to have as much of a realistic chance over to beat Gervonta Tank Davis? I mean, we can talk about Vasily Lomachenko, very talented fighter, but I think that he's a little bit more past it, at least when you talk about his absolute peak. And on top of that, Vasily Lomachenko, no offense against him, but every time that I really need to see him win one of the bigger fights in his career, at least some of the guys that would have been a little bit bigger than him, is no offense against Lomachenko, but every time he kind of felt the power and the size of his opponents, he kind of chicken shitted out a little bit. It is what it is, at least against Teofimo Lopez. Now, to be fair, against Devin Haney, he was there to fight, and I thought that was a fight that could have went either way. But against Teofimo Lopez, I'm not going to say that he quit in that fight, but it was a little bit more winnable than what Lomachenko made it seem. I thought that Lomachenko could have done a little bit more. It is what it is, and if Usyk can beat Tyson Fury and have the problems with the power and all that other stuff and also beat AJ Anthony Joshua, why can't Lomachenko potentially beat Teofimo Lopez? Why can't he potentially do that? So we'll see how he does against Gervonta Tank Davis, but I just don't trust Lomachenko to react well to the power. I just don't.
Leonard Ellerby's been telling you that. Even Floyd.
And then, of course, you have the other fighters like Shakur Stevenson. Shakur, of course, is a great fighter, but I'm a little bit worried, at least for Shakur Stevenson, in terms of his level of power. To be honest with you, it looks like that's going to be an issue. He does not have a grade level power, and if Gervonta Tank Davis does not respect your level of power, I don't think that he's going to have really that much of a problem getting in on you. Now, I could be wrong. Shakur could just completely outbox him throughout the whole entire fight. But he's got to be careful because, once again, it's not like Gervonta Tank Davis is just like some Subriel Matias or Deontay Wilder, or David Benavidez, where he has a limited skill set in certain areas. Gervonta Tank Davis might let go of certain first rounds, but when he needs to turn it up, he's going to. And he has that one-shot knockout power in either hand to really cripple you throughout a whole entire fight. So the question is about Shakur is this. It's not about whether he has the boxing ability. The question is going to be overall is how is he going to handle that power?
Mayweather, when he was handling Gervonta's career, was...
And then, of course, you have Teofimo Lopez and Devin Haney. But, I mean, Teofimo Lopez, we'll see where he goes. Teofimo Lopez might actually have the best chance over Gervonta Tank Davis just to potentially beat him just because of the level of power that he does have. And if Gervonta Tank Davis does pressure him, we'll see where it goes. Teofimo might actually have the best possible chance to defeat that of Gervonta Tank Davis. Devin Haney, I mean, we'll see. He's very quick with his feet. And, of course, he's not got the worst power in the world, but I just think that he's a little bit too flawed. But we'll see.
Telling you that, abso-effing-lutely. Tank continues to exceed expectations, and he's becoming more and more dangerous because he's becoming more efficient and very surgical. But I don't want to give away too much because I got other breakdowns where I'm really going to talk about the fight more. So you guys got to subscribe to the channel for the latest and greatest. But I like what I seen. I was happy with the final product. Money well spent. And that's always the case. I've never bought a Gervonta pay-per-view and felt a type of way after. He always...
Well, that's because, no offense against you, Mr. Boxing Eagle, but let's be real. You're on Gervonta Tank Davis's dick. It is what it is. And I like Gervonta Tank Davis just as much as the next guy, but Gervonta Tank Davis could have a terrible event and a terrible pay-per-view, just like he did against Isaac Pitbull Cruz, and you're not going to say anything about it. Like when Gervonta Tank Davis had that bombing pay-per-view against Isaac Pitbull Cruz, all you were telling people is, why are you pocket watching? Why are you doing this? So it's no offense, Mr. Eagle, but you're pretty much in Gervonta Tank Davis's pocket anyway. We can't really take anything you say seriously, at least overall completely seriously, when you're talking about Gervonta Tank Davis. But I do agree, Gervonta Tank Davis is an excellent show, and he's also an excellent fighter, and he will be the new face of boxing in my view.
Delivers what he's known for delivering, and that's special. Because how hard would it be to, if you're known for power and skills and all that, every time out to continue to show that? This is not by luck, that this is happening by some form of osmosis. He's literally putting in the work, and he has a great team. He has confidence, and he's gaining traction and maturing as a fighter right before your eyes, getting better and better, because there's no way Tom Brady is always winning these games and clutch games and moments and fourth quarter comebacks. Michael Jordan scoring all these buckets.
Agreed. I wish many of the Aaron Rodgers fanboys who would have been on his dick all the time throughout that generation overall would have understood that as well. Consistency is key.
6 rings, 6 playoffs. You know what I mean? It's just 6 finals, 6 rings. You gotta give it up.
The man said 6 playoffs.
To the Kobe Bryants, the Floyd Mayweathers, and now this generation, the Gervonta Davis. They keep doing what they say they're gonna do. He literally predicted.
Agreed. And as of last generation, the Canelo Alvarez's
knockout, I think in the 8th round, and he pulled the trigger. And my oh my, was it quite the knockout? Absolutely.
Yeah, that's definitely up there for knockout of the year. Definitely for sure. It's right there in my view with Zhang versus Wilder, Inoue versus Neri. It's up there for knockout of the year in my view.
So I want you all to pay attention, all those that are listening, pay attention to the shapeshifters, because now that we have an outcome, this is what they always do. They're going to change it and move the goalposts and start saying, oh, Tank needs to do this and Tank needs...
Yes, that's absolutely what haters do. You're one of them. You're just with it with different fighters. You're with it with Canelo Alvarez. You're with it with Tyson Fury. You're with it with other fighters that you need to tear down. But Gervonta Tank Davis is a black fighter, and on top of that, he's a black fighter that's with the PBC and could be the new face of boxing. So, you're going to crawl on your hands and knees for him as much as you need to.
Dude, Tank needs to take a vacation. He worked hard. He was in shape. Like, literally, he fought a person undefeated again. He fought a person and knocked him out again. He fought a game person. Nobody has ever made Frank Martin look that vulnerable. Nobody. I've watched mostly all of...
Well, in his last fight, he looked pretty vulnerable. But, you're not going to talk about that.
Frank Martin's fights, right? He's a southpaw. He was in shape. He was confident. He said he caught Tank in sparring. He did this interview, and he said, yeah, I heard that in there. He said he hurt Tank in sparring, but in the fight, that's where it matters, under the bright lights. Sparring.
Agreed. And that was another one of the things that I wondered, was he going to be able to hurt Gervonta Tank Davis? Unfortunately, the answer for him was no. At least wasn't able to majorly hurt him.
You're sparring. Like Floyd said, congratulations, you have an undefeated fighter in the gym. Like, no one really cares about that, especially when cameras aren't rolling in a lot of these situations and or the tapes haven't leaked. So it's about what you could produce in front of cameras. And Tank Davis did that. So the haters got to eat their words and eat their hearts out.
What if I can't make it to the game because...
But anyways, in terms of the ending statement from Boxing Ego, I agree. Gervonta Tank Davis is an excellent fighter. He's an excellent star. And I think that Gervonta Tank Davis, to be honest with you, unless something kind of catches me by surprise, I just don't see a whole lot of fighters that are really going to be able to beat him. But we'll see what happens. I think that he'll take over 135. I would love to see him versus Lomachenko and some of the other possible champions there. Of course, I would also love to see him at 140. I would love to see him versus Liam Paro or Teofimo Lopez or Ryan Garcia in a rematch at 140 or something else of a sort. We'll see what happens. To be quite honest with you, the two fighters that actually probably have the most amount of chance to beat that of Gervonta Tank Davis, in my view, probably would be Ryan Garcia and Teofimo Lopez. Now, do I believe that skill for skill, that they're quite on the same level as a Shakur Stevenson? No, probably not, but they have one-shot knockout power. And to be honest with you, against Gervonta Tank Davis, that might be a little bit more important than even what the boxing ability might be. Because Gervonta Tank Davis can get outworked in some rounds, as long as you're somewhat relatively intelligent and you don't get too feisty or a little bit too thirsty for the knockout like what Ryan Garcia did. But the thing is that Gervonta Tank Davis's power, you're just not going to be able to compete with that unless you're a naturally gifted athlete like Ryan Garcia or Teofimo Lopez. But we'll see what happens. But anyways, that pretty much is about it for today. Thank you guys so much for watching. I'll talk to y'all later.